Okay, so today's mini training, as you know, is on quality assessment. And we wanted to have this session today because it seemed like a lot of questions were coming up around this idea of doing quality assessment in your systematic review. And to be fair, there's not a ton of guidance for how this step should be undertaken in the social sciences. So David has talked a little bit about this before, but a lot of the methods around systematic reviews has come from evidence reviews undertaken in clinical medicine. But there are good reasons to undertake quality assessment when we're considering evidence from other disciplines as well. And sort of what some of the main points that I want to make today is that we just need to make sure that when we're doing these assessments that we're looking out for the right sort of things, and that we keep in perspective the value of this step in the systematic review process. So what is quality assessment and why do we need it? In short, the main idea behind quality assessment is that we shouldn't accept published research at face value. So the idea of quality and quality assessment doesn't refer to, for instance, the importance of a study topic or to like how nice a study is written. Rather, the main idea is that evidence for any number of reasons can be subject to some degree of systematic error or bias. And this can be down to reasons of cost or practicality or even accident or mistake. So in undertaking quality assessment, we want to determine if any of the individual studies are affected by significant bias, as this might affect how we should think about the results from the study as we're putting together this bigger picture that our review is producing. So this involves things like assessing whether the study is affected problems that might affect your interpretation of its results. So in last week's mini training, we talked about one sort of problem like this. So we talked about a problem that can afflict studies using survey data. And specifically, we talked about a problem that can arise if there is a large number of non-respondents. And if these non-responders are systematically different from the people who are responding to the survey, then this can cause some problems in interpreting the results of a study. So quality assessment helps us think about methodological issues like this, but interpretation of studies can also be problematic due to something called reporting quality. So sometimes too little information is offered by study authors. So too little information on the methods that they've used or what the background of the study is or what the settings of the study is. And this can also stop us from interpreting the study meaningfully. So we can distinguish between two aspects of quality assessment, how the study is conducted or methodological quality, and how it's being reported or reporting quality. And a key issue really to think about when we're thinking about reporting quality is whether the study as reported would allow us to reproduce or replicate the work. So this is a key element of doing high quality scientific research. And unfortunately, this poor quality of reporting is not uncommon in studies. So I'm sure many of you that are further along in your review have found that not all study authors are very clear about the sort of steps they've taken in their work. So with both of these aspects in mind, methodological quality and reporting quality, the idea is that we can use this information to weigh each study that's summarized in our review. So that, again, this broader picture that our review is painting is also the most accurate and transparent picture. Now, probably the best way to think about the aim of undertaking quality assessment in your systematic review is that it's an exercise that allows you to determine the degree to which the study that you're assessing is adequate for answering your review question. So this is a really important point, and I think it will become a little bit more clear as we move on. So again, the point of quality assessment is just to determine if any of the individual studies in your review are affected by significant bias. Again, this might affect the weight that you want to place on them when you're considering the whole picture that your review is painting. There are two types of bias that quality assessment considers: this methodological quality and reporting quality. And again, probably the best way to think about the aim of quality assessment is that it helps you determine how adequate a study is for answering the research question posed by your review. Okay, so let's just move on to think about broadly how we undertake quality assessment. So the way that quality assessment is set up is so that systematic attention is paid to all key aspects of individual studies in your review. So the study's design, methods, participants, setting, and really any key measures or variables that the study authors are using. And as you probably already know, this involves using a checklist of sorts to formalize the process of appraisal. And in our different Zoom meetings, you've probably heard about already a range of different checklists. And if you look on that Slack channel for quality assessment, David has provided a list of some of the most common ones used in social sciences, and some of the most common ones used by some of us in the group. Now, key of course to critical appraisal is, key of course to quality assessment is critical appraisal. But it's important to remember that while critical appraisal is essential to quality assessment, being critical is not an end in itself. So critical appraisal is not carried out in pursuit of some holy grail of perfection. So if systematic reviews only considered evidence from perfect studies, then they wouldn't have very many studies included in them at all. So we can think about this idea in terms of two extremes. If we didn't undertake quality assessment and research was accepted at face value, then we might run into this sort of type 1 error where we're accepting evidence that isn't necessarily true. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, if we treat all of our studies to overly excessive scrutiny, we run into a type 2 error where we're discarding evidence that is actually true, or at least has some evidential value for our review. Now, in a minute, we'll talk about how to choose the right sort of assessment tool for your review. But first, it's important to note that really care needs to be taken when we're using some of these off-the-shelf quality assessment tools. And again, this is because many of them have been designed for use with clinical interventions in mind. So here the risk is that they might encourage inappropriate criticism of evaluations of social interventions. And for this reason, researchers sometimes make careful adjustments to the tools. And this is something you can do as well, but I would only recommend this after you've gone through the sort of different considerations that I'll talk about next in choosing an appropriate tool. So that was a very sort of broad look at how quality assessment is done in a general way. And here are the main points where that quality assessment involves this systematic process of appraising studies in a critical way without applying excessive scrutiny. And also we talked about the idea that we need to be careful of the tools we use and that we're not applying inappropriate criticism, for example, to evaluations of social interventions. So now let's move on to consider the sort of considerations you should bear in mind when selecting your tool that you're going to use to undertake quality assessment. Now, the first and probably most obvious thing to think about is the type of studies your review is considering. And as many of you know, many tools have particular checklists for particular types of study designs. So for example, one reason I chose to use checklists from the Jonah Briggs Institute is that there were specifically 2 checklists that covered exactly the types of studies that were included in my review. So cross-sectional analytical studies and these sort of quasi-experimental studies. Now, it's also important to think about the purpose of your review. So my latest review, for example, was to assemble this picture of the evidence between COVID-related unemployment and health. But if I had been doing something like a meta-analysis on which drug improved outcomes for COVID patients better, I would need a checklist that, for instance, gave much more weight to randomized control trials, for example, than observational studies. And of course, you can still give more weight to different study designs in your review, but I wouldn't have wanted to use something like this grade checklist that's used for clinical interventions, which would have downgraded a lot of the studies in my review just because they weren't randomized control trials. Again, because what I'm interested in is the degree to which a study is adequate for answering my research question. And because my specific topic was more of this bird's eye view of what the early evidence was looking like. It wasn't demoting a study because it wasn't a randomized control trial didn't really make sense, because in essence, I was trying to find what sort of studies were out there and what the evidence was like. So again, here is just think about the purpose of your review when you're thinking about which tool to use, and make sure that as you're looking through these different checklists that it makes sense in light of this to use a certain tool over another. Now, another important issue to consider when you're choosing a tool is usability. So some of the tools involve these really long, complex questionnaires, and they can be really hard to use and difficult to interpret. And this wouldn't necessarily be a problem if you had a smaller number of studies in your review, say under 10 studies. But if you have a large review, I mean, this could really pose an issue if you're looking at like 50 studies, or I think some of you have over 100 studies in your review. So finally, as in a lot of things we talk about in this group, it's really useful to see what other people are using when they're undertaking similar reviews to you. So I've listed this consideration last here, but it's probably one of the first things that you should consider when you're trying to choose a tool. It's not only a potentially quick way to start narrowing down some of the potential tools in your area, but it does go some way towards also showing maybe the validity of the tool in your topic area. And it can even give you some level of defense if a reviewer were to raise an issue or a question with a tool. Now, that said, I think just because a tool has already been used in your area doesn't necessarily mean it's the right tool for your review. So you'll have to consider all of these various things and sort of weigh them up. So those were some of the main things to think about when choosing a tool, specifically what sort of studies you're looking at, what the purpose of your review is, the usability of the checklist, and then, of course, a good place to start here is to check some of the papers, some of the specific systematic reviews that have been done in your area. So now I just wanted to move to consider some things that are important in bearing in mind when you're undertaking quality assessment. And one thing to be especially wary of in undertaking quality assessment is some of these checklists use summary scores to give an overall rating of a study. So some checklists have, all checklists will have components that will be more or less important to assessing the value of a study to your review. So some checklists will consider different components, for example, of reporting quality, and downgrade a study if the title or the abstract doesn't contain some specific information. And while this is a limitation of the study, perhaps, it certainly wouldn't affect your interpretation of the study's results in the same way that a methodological issue would. And there's been a study actually that looked at how different checklists summarize scores for the same clinical interventions, and found that actually different checklists gave widely different scores. And that's not to say that using some sort of ranking scores isn't useful, but the point is just to be careful of how the ranking is being done and how it fits with the purpose of your review. Now, the other thing to bear in mind is that quality assessment isn't really an exact science. So David posted in the Slack group a study which compared two different common checklists. And this study found that there was very low correspondence between the assessments that these checklists made. And the authors concluded that there was really no clear choice in terms of how one would go about choosing one of these tools or over the other. Now, this might make you feel a bit frustrated about the whole process of quality assessment, but I think it's important just to keep in mind why quality assessment is done. So again, it's a systematic way to check for significant bias in a way that helps you determine how adequate a study is for answering the question of your review. So rather than feel frustrated about this, I think try and let this idea that quality assessment is not an exact science reassure you that, whatever tool you use isn't going to make or break your review. So you don't need to get especially hung up on this step of your review, so long as you're bearing in mind the sort of things we're talking about today. Now, a final consideration to bear in mind is whether you actually need a quality assessment at all. So there are some types of studies some types of reviews that while they use a systematic methodology, they don't necessarily need a quality assessment. And this issue becomes particularly pertinent if you're undertaking a scoping rather than a traditionally defined systematic review. So what's the difference between a scoping and a systematic review? I think probably the biggest distinction is that scoping reviews tend to map an evidence base. So for example, in terms of the features of the evidence or the volume, so how many studies are looking at this particular outcome versus this particular outcome. They can also be used to clarify sort of the conceptual boundaries of a topic or field to see what sort of ideas people are looking at in an area. And I think scoping reviews are typically used when a body of literature hasn't yet been comprehensively reviewed, or if it's complex in some way that makes a precise systematic review more difficult to undertake. Now, a resource that might help you think about whether you need to undertake a quality assessment at all is this study by Grant and Booth, who offer a typology of reviews of different sorts of both systematic and non-systematic reviews. And in this work, they have a table, sorry, it's really small. They have a table outlining a number of different types of reviews. And in this column, I don't know if you can see it, I'll put a box here. In this column under appraisal, they indicate whether specific categories of reviews should undertake a quality assessment at all, or if they can probably forego this step altogether. So here you can see, or maybe you can't see, it's quite small, that for scoping reviews, you don't really need a quality assessment, or they have down this state of the art review that also wouldn't need a formal quality assessment. Or if you're doing a rapid review, so a lot of us, I think, are looking at issues related to COVID and we want to get these out the door fast. So this might be a reason not to necessarily not do a quality assessment, but to do one that's quick and easy to implement. So those are some of the major things to bear in mind when thinking about a quality assessment. And I kept this review, this training relatively short to open up the floor for questions, because I know this is an issue that comes up a lot. And I know there's a few of you at least that are coming up to this step in your review. So I'll just summarize some of the main points that I've gone through so far, and then we can open up for questions and also for discussion, because I think for those of us who've already undertaken the quality assessment, we probably have some nice insights on the tools that we used that we can talk about. So things that were beneficial or hard to use about the specific different checklists that we were using. So doing a quality assessment can feel complicated, I think, but there's good reasons to have it as part of your review. So specifically, it provides a systematic way of thinking about potential biases. And if you were to forego this step, then all of these biases in individual studies could possibly translate into biased conclusions for your review. Now, when we're doing a quality assessment, it's important to keep in mind the purpose of the step of the review process and not to focus on being critical for the sake of being critical. What's important is whether a study is significantly biased in a way that might affect the weight that you place on them when it comes to putting together this whole picture that your review is considering. And in short, quality assessment should aim to determine the degree to which, again, the study is adequate for answering the question of your review. And so in choosing a tool, it's important to think about the types of studies included in your review, the purpose of your review, and the usability of the tool. And finally, we need to be wary of blindly adopting some of these summary scores. And we need to keep in mind this notion that quality assessment isn't an exact science. And rather than let this frustrate us, allow this idea again to reassure you that quality assessment and then which tool you use, it won't make or break your review again, but undertaking it is, and especially for certain types of reviews, good practice. So I'll stop here and let's see. Open up the floor for questions or discussion.
I have I guess a comment / question. Came
Yeah.
in about 10 minutes, but I think I heard the how to do it. Sorry. I thought the how to do it would be how to do it, meaning with an example, or I don't know. So I get the general idea, but what about how to actually do it?
Yeah, I mean, how to actually do it, first you need to find the checklist, and then it's just a matter of going down the checklist. And actually, you're right, something I should have said is that when you're undertaking the quality assessment, the best time to undertake the quality assessment is while you're doing the data extraction on your study, because at that point you're focused on the study, you're looking at all of these things anyways to try and understand the value of that study for your review. So that's the best time to do the quality assessment, because otherwise you'd be going back and you'd be spending the same amount of time again going over these things. But then, Susan, it's just a matter of going down the checklist, and we can look at an example of a checklist, but it's just the checklist is going to say different things depending on which one you use, but it's going to be a question like, did the study address confounding factors, for instance? And then it's as simple as checking yes, no, or unclear, or making some sort of note about that. Once you can find the tool that's right for your review, it really is just a matter of going down the checklist while you have the study next to you and assessing it. Did you have a particular concern about?
No, not yet. So I like one part of what you just said. So since you said that it'll be when you're extracting, I don't remember the term, but there's the extraction, and then isn't there where you actually select the studies that you will actually, so as early as the extraction, you will start to look at the quality? I thought it would be later down when you have the, what's the next term? I don't remember the term.
So the major steps of the review process. So first you're running your search, and then you get your first set of results, and then let's say you run your search and you have 2,000 papers, and then you do your title and abstract screening, and you see which of those are potentially meeting your inclusion criteria. And then you get the ones that are potentially meeting it, you get the full text on. And once you have the full text, then you go through and you look more in depth whether those studies are included in your review. And then once you have an idea of which studies are actually included in your review, then you start doing the data extraction. And while you're doing that data extraction is the right time to start doing your quality assessment.
That makes sense.
Okay. Rehab?
Yeah, I have one more question. I'm not sure if you covered it or not, but let's assume we have decided which tool we will use and we have our checklist ready. So we should have comment or fill the score in each item included in this tool, or we can omit certain items if we found them like not relevant.
Yeah, so you can definitely omit certain items that are not relevant. So that's one thing I mentioned is, a lot of people have to adjust these checklists because they're not made to cover everything, or they're made to cover more clinical studies. But just make sure that the tool that you did select before you start adjusting a tool, just make sure that, that is the most appropriate tool for you to use. And then you just have to be transparent when you're writing your manuscript. You say, we use this tool, but we omitted this question because it wasn't relevant to the studies included in the review, or we understood this question this way to capture this idea.
Yeah, got it. Thank you.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Thank you, Courtney. This has been very helpful because I've been in this quality assessment process, and it's just, I feel like it's a clear roadmap now. So once the quality assessment extraction has been made, like the next step is to sort of integrate into the writing or into the, so I'm like thinking about that now and what the best way might be. Because, so you mentioned sometimes it's used to as a way to like give a higher way to like higher quality studies versus not. So is this done sort of throughout the paper, or because I was also thinking maybe having the different sections and then a different section just focusing on maybe the differences based on the different quality rankings, or is this like something that what's usually the what's like the most common thing that's done, and how is it integrated?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the tool that you're talking about, does it provide some sort of summary assessment of like if it's low, medium, or high?
Yes, so it has sort of 5 categories, and then for each of those, it's either high risk or low risk. So that's why I guess I was thinking in the end, maybe summarizing also the results, and then maybe the results also like by high quality or versus low quality, or maybe because there might be there might be a different conclusion based if I look at one versus the other, but I want to show all of them, right? Because I don't want to be, selectively just choosing. Yeah.
So, okay, so there's a ranking of like low, medium, and high across each of these different components. And then is there like a final ranking, or just across these components?
No, there's no final ranking. It's just across the component. But but I think maybe some like more weight can be given to I would say
certain components.
2 out of the 5. Or
okay. So one good, I would be wary of putting all that at the end after someone has read through all the results, because you kind of want to present them a way to filter the results as they're reading. So maybe when you first start off writing your results, and you're giving this sort of broad overview of, we collected this many studies, they were from these sort of countries, these sort of populations, these age groups. When you're doing that kind of bird's eye view reporting, you could also put in something there like about the overall quality of studies. And if there's those 2 areas that are more important, specifically mention what things look like in those 2 components. And you can also like pull out some of the strengths of study in those components, or some of the weaknesses, like studies were given this many studies were given a low quality ranking in this component because they didn't do this A, B, and C. So that now when your reader is going through and reading, then at least he has an idea of how to think. And another option, and so also related to that, is you can have an appendix of how studies are ranked across each of the components then. And it could be just a simple figure that shows the ranking for each study. And another idea is to put in, while you're writing, and this would only apply if your checklist did that overall summary, is to put in what that overall summary measure was. So you say, the study authors, Bryant et al. Did a study on this in South Africa, and then just in parentheses put, the population number and the study quality. So then as someone's reading that, then they can get a quick idea of the quality of the study. Does that make sense? But then you, of course, you will talk about it later when you're in your discussion and in the limitations.
Thank you. This is very helpful.
Okay, cool. Rehab, I think you had your hand
Yeah,
first.
I have one more question. So let's assume I excluded 5 articles because they are of poor quality. So would I mention that in my Prisma, or it's something we refer to during the writing process itself, and we will no longer do any edits to our Prisma chart?
Yeah, that's a good question. Let me think for a minute if you put it in your Prisma. First, I would be careful of excluding a study entirely because of quality. So, I mean, you'll need a really good reason to exclude it. I mean, is there really nothing that those studies can offer for answering your question? If the answer is yes, then I'm not sure if you put it in the Prisma or not. It's okay to edit your Prisma, but it might come in at the box in the Prisma where you say after the full text reviews and you say the reasons for exclusion. One of those reasons could be did not meet quality criteria or something. And then of course,
okay, so will we comment on the quality assessment during writing itself? Maybe like, not sure in the methodology paragraph or any other paragraph, but would we refer like we found that like majority of our articles scored like, I'm not sure what's the number in terms of its quality. So would we mention that, right?
Yes, definitely. So in your methods section, you mention which tool you're using, if you made any adjustments. And then in the results section, you would mention, like I was saying for Ariri, like at the beginning, you kind of give this bird's eye view of the main characteristics of the study. So, you know, what countries they were undertaken in, or what the population sizes they were looking at, stuff like that. And there you could mention broadly what the quality looked like of the studies.
Okay, so can in this section we refer or mention that we found some articles we are not satisfied with their quality, so in the rest of the article we will not mention results based on them?
Yeah, I mean, if you leave the Prisma as is, then I would mention probably still in the method section, I think I would that you excluded 4 studies because of quality, and then you don't even have to say what you just said in the results section. Then it's just assumed you're not talking about them.
Got it. Thanks.
Yeah. Cynthia?
What you meant by bias. So after doing the quality assessment, we should report on the bias, or the bias rating is part of the quality assessment.
So the quality assessment tools are checking for bias in your studies. So when they're asking like, did the study authors look at important confounders? That's checking whether there might be bias in that study. And then you're reporting on the findings of your quality assessment in your manuscript. Did I answer your question, or am I not getting the idea?
So just by having the quality assessment tool, it means I've resolved the bias. So I don't need to mention that anything related to bias, or what? Is it just an assumption?
Yeah, so you use the quality assessment to check bias, but let's say you notice something else that was biasing studies in your review that wasn't captured in the checklist. You should definitely mention that in your manuscript. So for instance, my checklists, they didn't necessarily talk about where data was coming from. And I was noticing that all these studies on the relationship between COVID-related unemployment and health, they were internet-based studies. And of course that biases the results because there's a whole set of the populations that don't have access to the internet. So if you see things like coming up in your studies, you definitely need to mention that.
And what are the common dilemmas that the researcher might face while doing the quality assessment in terms of judging each item? Are there any common dilemmas or confusion points a researcher might go through?
Good question. So actually, I'll send that one back to the group. Was there any particular aspect for the people who have done quality assessment, was there any particular aspect that maybe tripped you up a little bit? Ariri, did you have trouble with anything?
Yes, so I can speak from my side. So one of my items, I have to assess the bias in the exposure. And in my case, the exposure is air pollution exposure. And of course, these measurements, so I have to assess the bias in the measurement. And the measurement, the way it's done, it's typically at a geographical level, or either with satellites or with air pollution monitors. So it's never perfect because an individual doesn't have a personal air pollution monitor. So whichever measure was used, even in the best study, it will never get an exact measure. There's always going to be some bias. And I think, so for me, the hard thing was to say, okay, everything's biased, or to say rather, okay, they use the best possible method and that combines several things, versus they used some measure that is, I don't know, that could be biased across regions that might be confounded with COVID or so. So I think, yeah, I mean, that was one of my biggest dilemmas. And so I think the way I defined the bias was the way of solving that. And I think I just have to be clear about the way I defined the bias, where sort of okay, I'm going to use, if it's using a government validated method, then I would say there's no bias. If they're using some method that's not necessarily very common or not used, or might be not, or might be confounded with the COVID based on results from other studies, then I might say it's medium or biased. So I think for me, it was just that was a difficult point, and not just for this measure, because you also have to assess the measurement, and not just exposure, but of the outcome, which can also lead you to the same sort of loop.
Yeah, so that was a really good example. And I think it brings back the point that there's no perfect study. And when you're thinking about bias, you have to think about how it's affecting your ability to interpret that study in light of what you're trying to figure out in your review. Does anybody else have any parts of that have done this? Mohammed, I know I think you've completed your quality assessment. You're maybe even submitted already. Did you have any problems?
Thank you, Courtney. I didn't have any, I wouldn't call it problems, but I had a challenge from picking which tool to use. Like David said, and like you reiterated today, there is no, it's sort of like a fractured paradigm. So different people are using different tools, and you can't say which is more valid than the other. So I just decided to stick with the Newcastle-Ottawa scale for cross-sectional studies. I think with RCTs and then other studies like that, because they're well established, they're ahead, the dilemma of which tool to pick isn't as much as for qualitative studies and for cross-sectional studies. So I went with the Newcastle-Ottawa scale. However, I adapted it, I tweaked it a little bit, because there was a place for ascertainment of exposure. I was looking at hesitancy and access to vaccines, and that wasn't relevant to the outcome I was looking at. So instead, I made it to ascertainment of outcome. That means whether the researchers had used I mean, whether the outcome was actually ascertained, which is hesitancy. Was it just an intention, or did the people actually refuse vaccines? So I just tweaked it a little bit. And to be honest, it doesn't make much difference. And you'd end up with more or less the same figures or the same values if you had used the non-adapted one or the other one. And because there is a lot of precedents, I've seen a lot of studies that tweaked it. I think it might be safe. I don't know that. So that's what happened. And if I may add to what you said about what your response to Rehab's question, I think it's very, very good not to exclude studies. When you said it, I just went through my mind and I saw that most of the studies said that, oh, they did not exclude, it kept on recording, we did not exclude studies based on quality. But usually what happens is they say, however, during our synthesis, we did not include these studies, but we report them narratively. That means they did not contribute to the meta-analysis when they were conducting the meta-analysis. So I think Rehab, like Courtney said, it would be better to include them. But then if you so wish, you can say they did not contribute to your synthesis if you're actually doing a meta-analysis. And which stage to exclude them on. If you must exclude, then I think it would be at the level of your exclusion. That means they wouldn't form part of your included studies, because your exclusion criteria would have stated that you are excluding studies of low quality, which I think also makes it complicated and cumbersome, because you would have to do a quality assessment even before your full text assessment, which I think, like Courtney said, it's better to stay away from that, since you have the option of excluding them in your synthesis, or you have the option of saying, actually, most of the studies, or 70%, are low quality studies. Therefore, our evidence, I mean, we don't have much confidence in these findings. That's, I think, my 2 cents on that. Thank you.
Yeah, I think really, really, really good points, Mohammed. It's really helpful. Selma, I see your hand up.
Hi, Courtney.
Hi.
Thanks for the presentation. It was really good. Yeah, I just wanted to point out, similarly with Mohammed, I also had a bit of an issue with the exposure criteria, because for me, my studies had to be done during lockdown. So that was sort of like the exposure, but it's not something measurable. So in my case, most of the studies then would be that it's not applicable in that sense. So would that be a right thing to do?
Yeah, I think that's, yeah, I think I'm trying to think if there is a reason that it wouldn't make sense not applicable, but essentially you're including studies that took place during a lockdown. So your exposure is a given. So
it's already in the inclusion criteria.
Right, right.
In the review, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think then it's fine to choose non-applicable for that.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, yeah.
I have a question related to Prospero. So how long should we wait for them to reply? I know it hasn't not a long time has passed, but for how long should I expect them to reply back?
Yeah, see, they came back to me relatively quickly, so that wasn't an issue for me recently. But I would say, I mean, I wouldn't wait, especially if you have a very topical issue you're looking at. I wouldn't wait to get started, because it's unlikely that they're going to come back with anything that would significantly change the way that you're undertaking the review. They might come back and want more information, for example, about how you're synthesizing the data or reporting the data, but they're unlikely to come back. They're not going to say that's the wrong tool, quality assessment tool, you have to change it, or you shouldn't extract that data, you should extract this data. They're just going to come back most likely if you haven't given enough information on something.
Should I have tagged it as related to COVID since I'm focusing on outbreaks, or I felt it's not directly related to COVID because it's focused on like long run and future predictions. So was it like a mistake from me that I didn't flag it as COVID related?
It's a good question because I guess it's applicable to COVID, but is it applicable to things that are ongoing with COVID?
No, we are focusing on like future predictions of outbreaks in general.
Okay, so
because,
I think it was the right choice not to flag it if there's no current applicability to COVID, what's happening on the ground now.
Yeah, okay. Another off-topic question, what is the PowerPoint software you're using?
It's Prezi.
Okay, can you share?
Yeah, I'll put it in the chat. It's probably just prezi.com. We have about 10 minutes left if anyone else has any questions or comments. That, again, for those of you who have already gone through this process. Oh, Mohammed, I see your hand now.
Thank you, Courtney. How do you use tools that assess robustness or certainty of evidence? Is it also part of the critical appraisal? Is it part of quality assessment, or it's a domain on its own?
What do you mean by certainty of evidence precisely?
Okay, like for instance, for qualitative studies, they have grade SAQL tools. That means tools that would show how much certainty you have in this evidence. So tools like those, are they used on their own? Are they standalone tools, or you do your quality assessment and use them as well?
Yeah, I think what you mean so is making a qualitative assessment on the certainty of the evidence that you're evaluating. In which case, the quality assessment is a window into that. It provides a way for you to discuss the certainty of evidence by discussing the biases that are in the studies that you're considering. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
That means you use them together with.
Oh, I think you're cutting out on my end. Don't know. Can everyone else hear anything?
Quality assessment tools. Hello?
Sorry, Mohammed, you cut out on my end. I'm not sure if it's my internet or yours.
Yes. No, it's mine.
Okay.
So yeah, I get you. It's a window. That means it's to be used together with it.
Yeah. I think some of you might be looking at more qualitative evidence, and there are also checklists for qualitative studies. So we can put some of those in the systematic review channel too. I will say that the tool that I used, the Joanna Briggs one, was nice because it was really quick to go through. It has 8 questions, really simple questions that you can just go through and check yes, no, not applicable. And then there's a spot for notes at the bottom. But again, it depends on the sort of question you're asking in your review. And in my particular review, it wasn't so much about, figuring out what the exact effect size of something was, or sort of, meta-analyzing the data. It was more about what's the evidence out there and where does it come from. So if your study is more, if it's kind of sitting in between systematic review and scoping review, I would say that the Joanna Briggs one is a really nice one to use. It really simple and fast. Any other questions, or if anyone else has used tools that they particularly liked? So I think also, like Mohammed said, the Newcastle Ottawa one has been used a lot. And so that's one that, you can defend your use of that assessment tool easily.
I have one quick last question.
No problem.
I know some of you may also be doing COVID-related systematic reviews, and I was wondering how did you approach the assessment of like COVID-19 measurement? Because I know, especially if it's like something that compares across regions. I think one of the questions is like how comparable are the measurements across exposure groups, and like for me the exposure groups are like geographical regions, and I know there may be some variation in the way that it's measured from, I don't know, one country to another, or so. How did any of you go about thinking about that? Like, is it there's always going to be some potential risk of bias, or yeah.
Has anyone else looked at like COVID related outcomes like infection rates or deaths across regions?
Yeah, I think I'm thinking more about infections or cases, because I think there may be less of a risk of bias.
Right. Okay.
So yeah, I think in terms of cases is the one that I'm struggling the most with.
I
It's
mean,
also like related to resources, right? Like the more testing capacity that you have, then the more.
Yeah, I mean, you're doing the right thing by thinking about these things, and essentially you just need to flag this in your review, and it's a limitation. So you can't assess precisely what the bias is doing, but you can give an idea of the fact that when people are reading your review, that their interpretation of it has to take into account this limitation. But we should have some sort of list in the Slack group, I think, of what everyone's research questions are, so that we can reach across the aisle when we need to see who's doing similar things. We could have a list of people's questions and what tools, quality assessment tools they're using, so then we know who we could possibly reach out to for help. But does that answer your question, Imari?
Yes, thank you. I think,
yeah.
I mean, it's not clear, not because of the answer, but it's just not, it's just, it's something that I need to write out and make sure like it's like you said, flagged, but not, okay.
I mean, another idea is to look into whether there is some other study or other people have commented on what, like, how accurate those measurements are. So if you can find some other work that has looked at that, then that can help inform how you think about some of the figures coming from like resource poor areas or something.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Thank you.
Yep. Susan, I see your hand, Susan, but I can't hear anything from you.
Oh, no?
Oh, now I can.
Okay, so I guess the headphone's not working. Right, so my question is, will this be put in the Kajabi course? Because it just, to me, it makes more sense. I wasn't here for half of the call, and I would love to watch it afterwards. And I find that, I don't know, I'm frustrated with how, to me, you have things all over the place. That's how I see it. I think that this is important enough. I would love it to be in the Kajabi course, not in some drop thing that I have to go through and look.
Yeah,
so sorry that I couldn't listen to the entire session.
Yep, so the session is recorded. It will be posted in the Dropbox. I can send you a direct link to it easily. And I'll feed back to David that it might be something useful to add to the Kajabi course, definitely. And I'm still, Susan, we talked about this maybe a couple Wednesdays ago about, you mentioned it might be nice to have some sort of roadmap of what the systematic review process is. So we are thinking about a way of putting some of this in writing in a way that would be useful for everyone.
Also, can we cover how, like, after the data extraction, we will extract only like some particular sentences from the article? So how would we have like this critical appraisal or insights to add opinions or like synthesize the data or our results section, not referring to the writing, but I'm referring to the insights. What kind of questions should we ask to ourselves so we can come up with a conclusion or results in our review?
Yeah, I think this is the sort of things that you're talking about are going to become more apparent once you start extracting data and going through the reviews. You're going to start realizing, like, you're going to see patterns in the results. You're going to start raising questions yourself against some of the studies. And so when you're doing the data extraction, it's more than copying and pasting information from the studies into your Excel form. You're reading the study and you're getting an idea of what the results are and what the strengths of the study are and what the limitations are. And it's a good idea to keep notes while you're doing the data extraction, either in the electronic PDF or if you're printing them out, of just some of the things you're thinking about when you're going through there. And you might even want to keep a separate notes file of sort of larger questions that you want to return to in other studies or in your discussion section or how you're organizing your results.
Rehab, which kind of notes are these you talk about?
I'm just referring like because when we are doing the systematic review, we are not only like extracting data, we try to add our own opinion and reflections. So that's what I was referring to, like any advice that will help us to get the best out of our critical approach. Sorry?
Because when you watch the guide on Kajabi with David and I don't know, the initial guide, I think there's a time he says, depending on the method you use to analyze, you can either use a Word document where you find those statements that can help you either in the discussion or in the results. And then you just paste in the Word document and then attach the citation. Because maybe they might help you when you're writing. So when you watch that video, he shows like, depending on your heading, so you outline your document based on how the structure of your document, and then you just paste according to the structure. So if you feel this statement might be helpful in the introduction of your results, you put it in the results section. If you feel it will be in the discussion, in the, I don't know what you call it, conclusion. If you feel it will be useful in the conclusion, you put it in the conclusion. If you feel it will be important in the introduction, you paste it on the introduction and then put the citation. Then later when you're organizing, I think if you can watch that video, he showed like where you can use, I don't know which method, because for me I chose the DAG, the DAG, but he showed different methods of analyzing your data, and then based on the method, then it teaches you on how to extract, what to extract. And then he said maybe you can consult someone who's senior in your area who can guide you on what key things you can look for, because you need someone who has insight on the literature. So watch that video. I think it has some information related to what you're asking.
Yeah, thank you so much, Cynthia. I needed that in the right moment.
Yeah, it's a really nice idea to have sort of the sections in a Word document of your, and then you can just put in, useful notes there and under the right section.
Because for me, I also had the same challenge with, because I had, when I'm going through maybe the abstract, I have these ideas coming up, like why did this paper do this and that? So it was helpful, like either I put it against that article in the Excel sheet, or I just type in my Word document and then put the citation or highlight, then highlight in a different color or put in brackets like refer to this section later, so that it doesn't interrupt with what I'm doing, because I have this mind that easily gets distracted. So I just put in brackets so that later I can refer and know, okay, this article, I need to focus in this area, or this article needs more insight based on this. So you can have that one document where you put all this information based on the method that you choose. There are 3 methods, I think. I forgot the others, because when I chose my method, I think I just ran with it. So based on your method, it shows you, it guides you on what to do about it, and then have someone like a mentor in your area who can tell you like these are the things to look for. These are the critical questions to ask, something of the sort.
Yeah, thanks, Cynthia. That's really helpful. So definitely check out the Kajabi courses. And I especially think having like something in your Excel form, your data extraction form, like a section for notes is really a good idea. But I'm gonna wrap us up now, and I'll see all of you next Monday or next Wednesday, and have a great weekend.